In this video we're going to talk about collective bargaining. Now Anderson defines collective bargaining as those arrangements under which wages, salaries, and conditions of employment are settled by a bargain in the form of an agreement made between employers or associations of employers and workers' organisations. In other words, it's an agreement between workers and employers over the remuneration of the workers and the terms and conditions of the employment. Collective bargaining is a process used to solve workplace problems. It's a situation in which negotiations are called for, and the collective bargaining structure within the company indicates when employers and workers should come together to negotiate issues or to resolve issues. And there is a framework within which those negotiations can take place. The concept of collective bargaining revolves around bargaining power. Employees are only powerful if they are in a collective group and share the same values. So it's important that the members of the workforce who are involved in negotiations have the same objectives, have broadly the same opinions and the same desire for particular outcomes. But they must also be formed into a group. If a single employee tries to negotiate with the employer, the single employee is weak and is unlikely to achieve any significant outcome. But when the individual workers combine into a group and negotiate, then the employers are in a sense forced to take it seriously, and that's when collective bargaining comes into play. Collective bargaining involves employers and employee representatives negotiating to reach agreements concerning terms and conditions of employment, wages, working hours, working conditions. So it's important that there is goodwill on each side so that the negotiations are likely to be successful, and there is a framework within which the negotiations can take place. It's likely to be the case that the participants in the negotiations will know each other. It's likely that the union representatives on the one side may be well known to management, and they will know each other almost on personal terms. But they will know also the negotiating strategies and the types of positions that each will take in terms of negotiations. Collective bargaining is the framework within which it all takes place. There is an agreement that they will meet. There is an agreement that will meet, and they will undertake negotiations in a certain format. So collective bargaining is an element of negotiation. However, takes place collectively instead of individually. So it's collective bargaining is bargaining as a group. So it involves the trade union. There could be negotiations by a single member with the organisation, with the management, but as I said, that's unlikely to be successful. So collective bargaining, when they form into a group, when the workers form into a group and negotiate as a group, then there is a much more equality of power on each side, and the negotiations are likely to be more successful. Within an organisation, a collective group of employees represent more bargaining power than an individual. That's the point. The point is that when individuals come together and they've got similar opinions and similar desires, so they're more united on the one side, and they negotiate as one, they're likely to get a better outcome. If conducted in a controlled and professional manner, collective bargaining can be seen as a good approach to building relationships with employees, unions and employers. So it depends on the framework. It depends on whether it's quite an aggressive framework or if it's a very friendly framework where there is a recognition that both sides want an outcome. They want an equitable outcome, a fair outcome. The requirements on the trade union side are, in a sense, reasonable. They're related to work, and the argument is being well presented, supported with evidence and backed up and so on. And on the other side, the management must have a sense of goodwill as well and recognise the claims of the unions and understand the claims of the unions. And within that framework, there can be negotiations. Clearly, it's in both their interest not to give much ground. The trade unions want to get as much as possible, and the employers want to give as little as possible. But that's the purpose of the negotiation, to try and find a solution. So collective bargaining is a process in which both management and employee representatives participate. So two sides are involved. It's a continuous process which aims to develop positive relations between employees and employers. It doesn't just happen once. This is perhaps almost a routine event. Sometimes there may not be issues of negotiations. It may be simply a reporting back that the management want to make certain changes, and the unions will have to then consider the changes where it's in the interest of their workers, of their members, whether it's in the interest of the business in total. Sometimes the trade unions will be also worried about the future of the business. And most of these communications will take place within a collective bargaining framework. They will meet as two, the trade union on the one side and the management on the other, the employers on the other side. And the trade unions will have the authority of their membership to speak on their behalf. Reaching a bargaining agreement and making plans for implementing new processes. That's what collective bargaining is about. It's trying to find agreements and also making plans for implementing new processes. The companies change over time, and changes affect the workers. And what the unions want is to try to ensure that the workers are not adversely affected. So there is negotiations to try and ensure that the changes, which may be necessary because of changing competitive situations in the market, the changes that are being implemented take the workers into account. And perhaps both sides, both the trade union and the management, will have to work together to try and find solutions to problems. But it's also aimed at achieving harmony in the industry and the workforce. It's trying to find common ground. It's trying to find a peaceful route through time. When issues arise, the trade unions can expect management to be reasonable and understanding of the situation, and likewise the management can expect trade unions to make reasonable cases and to support with evidence what they're negotiating for. So there is an understanding on both sides. There's a harmony within the system that enables the business to go forward in time. The objectives of collective bargaining, well, it offers workers opportunities to voice their concerns and opinions. Workers can be heard. They're heard through the trade union structure. The individual members of the union make representation to their shop stewards or to their branch secretaries, or they go through the trade union and voice their concerns or their issues, and they will be picked up and dealt with and aired with the management. Whereas if a single worker went to the management, they would probably be ignored. But going through the trade union system, they're going through the collective bargaining framework, the individual can be heard. They have influenced their union, and the union has brought the point to the notice of the management. The objectives are also to reach a collective agreement where both parties benefit. And both parties can benefit. The unions may have to compromise what they want, but they will get a good outcome, one that will enable them to continue work and to continue cooperating with management. And the management will get a good outcome because the business continues and they're able to find savings elsewhere perhaps, or they're able to find more productivity, or they'll have got something back, some quid pro quo will come back to the management out of the negotiations. Another objective is to resolve disputes in a professional approach by following policies and procedures. It's important that the disputes are resolved in ways which are rational. It's pointless trying to resolve the dispute by shouting at each other, by walking out and thumping the table. So it's important that there are procedures and policies, and there's a recognized code of conduct, and both sides adhere to this. It also develops positive organizational relationships. There is a good relationship between the trade union and the management. There is, as I said earlier, a more harmonious place to work. It's a better environment, and everyone seems to be pulling in the same direction. And there is also recognition and support for increasing productivity by avoiding industrial actions. It's necessary to have increasing productivity if the company is going to beat off international competition, if it's going to meet the ever-increasing demands of its customers in terms of quality, delivery, price, and so on. So the workers within the company must understand this, and there must be some way in which they can accommodate their requirements and those of the customer. The characteristics of collective bargaining, well, it's a technique used by trade unions to improve the terms of the employment contract. The trade unions are always trying to improve the terms of the employment contract. The hours worked, trying to get more holidays, get better concessions, but it also could go down to a better working environment. Of course, it also can include extra pay. The process relies on negotiation and working together to achieve a collective agreement. So there has to be a framework in which both sides will negotiate, and they will allocate time and resources to the negotiations. It's important that the management enter negotiations and enter it with a positive frame of mind, where they are prepared to make compromises. It's also important that the trade unions do exactly the same. It's a bipartite process. Only two parties are involved in the dispute. There are no third-party influences. It is just management and trade unions negotiating. There is nobody else involved. To improve relations between unions and their members and employers. So that's a characteristic of collective bargaining. It does improve the relationship. If there are collective agreements, then it means management and the trade unions have agreed, and they should work according to the agreement and operate with a sense of goodwill on both parts. On the part of the trade union, to ensure that work is completed of a good standard and the terms of the agreement are honoured, and on the part of management to ensure that they are not going to bring out some surprises and introduce new technologies without negotiation, or make fundamental changes to the business without negotiations and without consultation with trade unions. So both parts of the agreement, both parties to the agreement and both parts of the agreement, whatever has been agreed, must be clearly understood and must be honoured. Collective bargaining as a process includes the following activities: distributive bargaining, we'll talk about that in a second, integrative bargaining, and intra-organisational bargaining. Now, distributive bargaining is based on the win-lose principle. One of the parties gain and the other parties lose. This is a competitive form of bargaining with little or no cooperation. There is a theory in a type of mathematics associated particularly with economics called game theory, and this is called the zero-sum game. Whatever one wins, the other loses. So a win-lose principle, it doesn't have to be as precise as the theory of games, but it's broadly based on this. Whatever one wins, the other loses. It's zero-sum. So it could be, in the distributive bargaining sense, that management win the negotiations, and that means the trade unions lose, or the trade unions win and the management lose. So it's competitive. Whatever one gets, the other loses. If it's cooperative, then both parties try to give and take, and you can share out the requirements of each party. They can compromise on the requirements and try to find a solution in between, so that you could have a win-win. Integrative bargaining is a win-win situation. Both parties gain. The aim in this type of bargaining is to cooperate with each other and to achieve mutual agreement. So they actually agree, they work together, they compromise. So both of them come away with something, and they share what they come away with. The distributive bargaining, one overwhelms the other and one takes all. The other party loses. Inter-organisational bargaining. Well, this form of bargaining is concerned with resolving internal disputes within each party. So it's concerning internal disputes within each party. The trade unions may not be speaking with one voice. The trade unions may have issues associated with their members, not all of them agreeing to the terms of the negotiations or the wording of certain documents, or there may be issues between them, and its bargaining is concerned with trying to resolve these internal disputes. Intra-organisational bargaining, the trade unions may be trying to find solutions between differences between the members, trying to find common ground between the members, so the members are all united behind a particular course of action. But also it happens within management. The management may be divided about what to do under certain circumstances. Each member in a party may have different interests, which inevitably causes conflict. So there's an issue about getting the single voice into the collective bargaining framework. When the trade union enters into negotiations with the management, does it have 100% support from its members, or is there a big dissenting group? And if there is, that of course will weaken the hand of the negotiators. But the same applies to management. It's important to resolve all disputes before parties opt for negotiations. Internal conflict will have a negative impact on the overall outcome. If the union enters into collective bargaining with its membership divided on the issue, the management will know this, and they will be able to beat the negotiators, the union negotiators, as a consequence. So it's important that the the membership are united. And likewise on the management side, it's important that all the different strata of management and all the senior management in particular understand, are clear and behind the stance being taken by the management in the negotiations. Now Anderson identifies a logical approach to bargaining. We start with the preparation for the bargaining, the physical conduct of the bargaining, the actual bargaining process itself, and the end of the bargaining. So we have three processes, three parts. Now the preparation, well, planning for the negotiation stage. This stage involves researching and collecting information and analysis. The negotiators simply can't arrive in and negotiate and have nothing to say other than they want something. What they normally do is to bring in facts and figures and research and statements by politicians and statements by other business leaders, and so it's a prepared case. It's not just on the spur of the moment. And likewise management will have prepared their case with facts and figures and market trends and showing how the market is moving and how prices are changing and so on. So there's adequate preparation on both sides for the negotiations. It involves setting objectives that are achievable and likely outcome from the negotiations. Setting objectives which are not achievable is bordering on silly, because they can't be achieved, so why spend time negotiating for them? Setting objectives which are achievable is more likely to yield results. So being reasonable about the claims is very important. So both parties must have a strategy and tactics in place. There should be an ideal and realistic outcome. It's not a question of the trade union humiliating the management or the management humiliating the trade union. There should be a realistic outcome. You should compare it with the status quo. The status quo is what is right now. What is the position before the negotiations take place? And use that as the baseline. Look for ideal trading opportunities. Look for situations where one side in the negotiation can concede a certain point in exchange for something else. So they are conceding points whilst looking for something in exchange. They are, in a sense, trading opportunities within the negotiations. They will forego extra overtime payment, perhaps in exchange for shorter working hours, or something of this nature. So they will trade their requirements. And the parties' settlement agreement, once they've got an agreement, they honour it. This has been negotiated, and they should not seek to humiliate the other side or laugh at the other side for making too many concessions or boast about their negotiating skills. They should take what they've got, and it was earned through good negotiations and good negotiating skills, and go away with that. That's the outcome of the negotiations. The conduct of the negotiations. In this stage, both parties arrange to meet to resolve the dispute. So they must meet, physically meet. During the negotiations, each party proposed their list of demands while the other party offers counter proposals. So they agreed to meet somewhere. It could be in a local hotel, or uh, it could be in the company itself, in the offices in the company. And when the negotiations start, each set out their demands, their requirements, if you like, and the other party will offer counter proposals. In other words, they will reject what the one side wants and offer counter proposals. And this is the starting of the negotiations. This stage should be cooperative in order to reach mutual agreement. They should recognize that they're just starting. They're setting out their opening positions. And they must be prepared to compromise. They must be prepared to negotiate and make compromises on their opening positions. So their opening positions are normally quite far apart and also quite extreme. But they're aiming to make compromises. Then, if both parties reach a collective agreement, that after negotiations they've agreed on a certain course of action, that, let's say, wages will rise by a certain percentage, and more productivity will be required in certain sections, and so people have given and taken, and there is an agreement. And then at that stage it must be implemented. It takes us to the end. The formal agreement stage. Both parties accept or decline the offer. The trade union must go back, because it's negotiated on behalf of its members. It must explain the negotiations to the membership of the trade union and then ask for them to approve it. If they reject it, then the negotiations will have to reopen. If they accept it, then work may continue, and both sides will, in good faith, implement what they've agreed. If an agreement has to be made, both parties discuss how they move forward. For example, how to implement new policies. So the various parties to the negotiation must agree how they're going to move forward, how they're going to implement what they've agreed. There might be a time scale involved, or there might be certain courses of action required. It may be that the workers need additional training to meet the requirements of the new package. So there must be clear guidance as to what is going to happen, and this may involve the trade union and the management working together to make sure that the implementation stage lives up to the spirit of what was agreed. If an agreement cannot be finalized, the last resort will be to introduce external parties. For example, the Arbitration and Conciliation Service. Now that may be involved, or it might be that they agree to go to some other agency. They may even agree just to have an expert in, perhaps an industrial relations expert in, or an employee relations expert in, or have a solicitor or a lawyer in who will sit in judgment and listen to both sides and try and move them together. But if the agreement cannot be finalized, the need to perhaps bring in outside agencies to try and get them together so that they can all move. And of course, having an outside agency means that both sides must try to appear reasonable. Otherwise, they look to be the ones who are destructive, anti-agreement. So it could be, if there is no implementation, or they find it difficult to implement what they've agreed, it may be, rather than going back and having more negotiations, they go to some sort of arbitration. The final stage involves reaching two types of agreements. Substantive agreements, an agreement between the employers and the employees regarding terms of the employment contract, for example, introduction of new policies. So there is a substantive agreement. That's an agreement between them regarding the terms of the employment contract. Now that is serious. So it's quite substantive. It's an important issue. They've agreed something which affects the employment contract. So that might be one of the outcomes. And also procedural agreements, the process and steps involved in achieving the substantive agreement. So there are two types of agreement in the final stage. Procedural, to making sure that what was agreed will be implemented, and the actual changes that was agreed, the substantive ones, are put in place. So, for example, if the employers agree to more wages in return for more productivity, let's say, that's substantive. That could be written in as an agreement. And the procedural part is, how will this be achieved? What steps will be put in place to enable this to happen? So there are two parts. Substantive, what was agreed, making sure that that happens, and procedural, what steps are put in place to help it to come about. And that's all we're really going to deal with in terms of collective bargaining. These are some of the insights into the collective bargaining process. It's important that you go back over this, make your own notes, and also do some research into the area and make your notes much more comprehensive and detailed and give lots of examples. There's the source that I was talking about earlier, and that's all I'm going to deal with in this session. So thank you for watching.